I know that symbol. What is it?
Find out, won't you?
Quentin Coldwater sits with his psychiatrist and shows her a magic trick. He's shown to be suffering from social anxiety and isolation as he ends up lecturing his doctor. Now we fast forward to a party where Quentin is having a hard time socializing with the others. Back at the mental ward, Quentin maintains that he doesn't want to stay locked up and wants to go back to the real world. However, he doesn't do much over there either, as he's only interested in reading a fantasy story about Martin Chatwin and his magical family in the fictional land of Fillory. Now, Quentin's best friend Julia Wicker tries to motivate him to focus on the girls in the party instead, but she's unable to convince him. They are interrupted by Julia's boyfriend James and some other friends. Later, Quentin and Julia go for an interview, but they find the dead body of a man named Bob. His body is taken away, and then the paramedic Eliza gives Quentin a book about Fillory. This excites him, but Julia doesn't want Quentin to live in his fantasy world and tells him to make something of his life. After that, Quentin loses one of the sheets and chases after it in an alley. Meanwhile, Julia faces problems with an elevator as she goes for her Yale interview. Suddenly, both of them are transported to an unknown fantasy land. Quentin runs into Elliot Waugh, who tells him that he's in Brakebills University, New York. Now we meet the Dean Henry Fogg, who tells all the students to focus on their magical exams. And Quentin is shocked to see how the questions are randomly changing in front of him. He's happy to meet Julia and they try to figure out how they got here, but Henry tells them to go to their assessment rooms. Unfortunately, Julia fails her test but isn't ready to leave, so she leaves a mark on her arm before her memories are erased. Quentin also struggles at first but manages to pull off a magic trick after Henry pushes him. He creates a house of cards but faints after that. Later, Quentin runs into Jane Chatwin from the Fillory books and she warns him against a beast that is coming for him. Quentin is confused, but then he wakes up in his dorm and thinks of it to be a dream. Julia also wakes up but in the real world. However, she's able to remember her time at Brakebills after she looks at her wound. Now Henry gets Quentin to sign his admission form and he readily agrees, but he's also asked to hand over his meds as he won't need them here. Later, Quentin meets his roommate Penny Adioti. They don't get off to a good start, but they're interrupted by Elliot and his friend Margot. They tell Quentin about the rules of the university and also go on to show him the different kinds of magic. That's when Quentin also learns about the dangers associated with magic when he sees some troubled third-year students. During the first class, we meet Alice Quinn, who demonstrates her magic by creating a small glass horse. She's shown to be an overachiever, but she's very shy and refuses to socialize with anyone. Quentin goes to her and says he's scared of getting kicked out as he's very weak, but she only rebukes him and tells him to leave. James calls Quentin and tells him about Julia's odd behavior, so Elliot and Margot help him to go back to the real world for her birthday party. Julia feels very off in general, so Quentin goes to talk to her. She says she remembers Brakebills and asks him to convince them to take her test again. She tries to show him some magic of her own, but he discourages her from getting into this world. However, she feels like they cut her off from her life by rejecting her and goes to the washroom. Suddenly, Julia is assaulted by a man named Pete, whom she rejected earlier at the bar. He pushes her to use her powers and says that he's only doing this to confirm her magical skills. Later, Quentin hears some knocking and passes through a door to Fillory, where he meets Jane again. She warns him to stay away from Brakebills, as he will die if he follows his current path. Then she puts a sigil on his hand, after which he wakes up from his sleep, but he notices that the mark is still there. Quentin meets Alice and shows her the scar, so she tells him to meet her later as she wants to use it to contact the other side. She offers to help him pass his exams if he agrees to help her, so they seal the deal. Meanwhile, Penny tells his new girlfriend, Katie Diaz, that he's struggling with the thoughts in his head. The voices return and they lead him to Alice and Quentin trying to perform a seance. After a brief argument, Penny and Katie decide to join them as well. It doesn't work at first, but then we see an ominous smile in the mirror. Meanwhile, Pete takes Julia with him to a secret location. The next day, during class, everyone suddenly freezes. That's when a man with moths on his face enters from the mirror. He's revealed to be the Beast and he kills the professor. Henry tries to stop him, but it's of no use, and the Beast seemingly kills him too. After this, he goes to Quentin and recognizes him by name. Quentin suddenly wakes up and is questioned by a teacher named Pearl Sunderland about what happened. She asks how the beast knew his name, but Quentin is completely clueless. Meanwhile, Pete introduces Julia to his team of hedge witches, where there seems to be another newcomer named Marina Andreevsky. They're taken to a deep freezer and Pete locks the women inside, after which he leaves. In a flashback, we learn that Henry had given Quentin his watch and it allowed the others to break free from the spell and send the beast away. Sunderland says there will be an investigation and our leads worry about it because they know they are guilty. As Jane and Marina try to figure their way out, they find a dead body and panic. Now Quentin tells Elliot about what happened and they get into a heated discussion. After a brief argument, Elliot reveals he killed someone when he was 14 and it makes things awkward. Meanwhile, Margot talks to Alice and learns about her past, but Alice leaves as she senses something suspicious. Back to the girls as they struggle with their test, and then it gets worse when Pete summons a zombie from the dead body. A chase sets in and Julia manages to kill the zombie, which is then possessed by Pete. He tells the girls to focus on the test and gives them a hint so they get to work. Now Alice tells Quentin that she feels bad for getting him into this mess, as she thought his sigil was connected to her brother Charlie's spirit. Quentin tells her about Jane and Fillory, but she doesn't believe him. He backs it up with proof, but Alice panics even more as she believes she will get kicked out after the investigation. As they try to come up with a cover story, Penny tells Katie that he was being duped by the Mothman as he was the one putting voices in his head. He feels embarrassed, but Katie tells him that he should do something silly with her before leaving. They steal a protective locket from the school and then bump into the others. Sunderland finds them and questions the entire group as she has found the summoning book that awakened the beast. After a tense sequence, Penny tells her everything and she spares all of the students. But Quentin is told that an expert is being summoned to wipe him away from here. He talks to Elliot and asks if he can be saved, but it's of no use. Feeling desperate, Quentin calls Julia and asks for help, but she's busy solving the puzzle, so he cancels the message. He attacks Penny for ratting him out, but it backfires on him as Penny has the locket. They are both taken to the infirmary, where Penny shows off the locket to Quentin. Now Julia finally manages to find the puzzle solution, which was simply to unlock the room without using magic. Then we learn that Marina is the real boss and Pete is simply her accomplice. We also learn that Katie is working for her as she gives her a book she stole from the library. Later, Quentin steals the locket from Penny, after which he meets Eliza. She reveals that she also has the same dreams about Fillory and eventually states that she'll give Quentin another chance at Break Bills, although it will be probationary. Meanwhile, Julia is officially welcomed into Marina's group of hedge witches and she rejoices. Now Eliza meets Henry, who's shown to be alive but without his eyes and hands. He rebukes Eliza by saying the beast is her problem and she should solve it immediately. They also lament that Penny and Quentin aren't ready for the challenge that lies ahead. Now Julia begins her training as a magician, while Henry also resumes teaching. Julia starts to struggle in her relationship, but James tells her to focus on what's important. Now Alice is shown to have light-bending powers when she is tested, but Sunderland can't figure out Quentin's skills. Later, he and Alice go to Elliot's party but have a hard time getting in, so they use her powers to burn through the door. They start drinking and Alice gets wasted, so she makes fun of Quentin when he tries to explain a locator spell to her. They cast it later on in front of a fountain, but it doesn't work. However, a zombie hand awakens after they leave. Later, Penny confronts Quentin for listening to Taylor Swift as he's psychic and can hear his thoughts. Now the school declares that the fountain is off limits as the hand has been attacking students that go near it. Alice thinks this is Charlie and finds some glass horses in her room that essentially confirm it. Meanwhile, Elliot takes Quentin to deal with a missing book as he's worried that Sunderland will shut down his parties if she finds out that it got lost because of them. They decide to use volume 2 of the same series to find it and follow its trail. Now Alice finally gets the courage to talk to Margot and she helps her with Charlie by mentioning his classmate Emily. Meanwhile, as Penny tries to get some psychic help, he suddenly ends up in Tokyo. Now the girls meet Emily and she tells them how she had once messed up a beauty spell that she used to seduce a married teacher. Charlie found out about her and used an untested spell to help fix the damage. However, it resulted in him burning right next to the fountain. At the same time, Elliot and Quentin follow the book to the Hedge Witch lair and meet Pete and Julia. The Hedge Witches deny having Volume 1, but then the book appears and hilariously reunites with Volume 2. Before they leave, Julia confronts Quentin about not helping her with break bills, and it ends in a very uncomfortable conversation about their priorities. Now Penny runs into Henry and Sunderland, who tell him that he's not a psychic but rather a traveler. They say it's a dangerous power, so he needs to be trained, and Sunderland takes him back to the school. Later, Alice tries to convince Quentin about a spell she can use to bring back Charlie, but he's against it, so she leaves angrily. Then we see Julia telling James that she's addicted to Adderall, and they make up with a hug. At night, Quentin and Alice go to the fountain and try out the spell. It seems to work when Charlie arrives, but he turns out to be a malicious spirit and attacks them both. Alice tries her best to bring him back, but it doesn't work, so Quentin traps the spirit in an amulet. Alice gets upset because of this and decides to leave the school. The next morning, Quentin wakes up inside an unknown place and meets a strange man. He realizes he's in a mental institution and finds Elliot, who's desperate for drugs, after which he sees his psychiatrist. He believes this is a dream, but she says that he's been hallucinating as he hasn't been taking his pills. Quentin sees some moths and starts to panic, so the doctor calls some guards to restrain him, one of them being Penny. Later, Quentin meets Alice, who says that this is indeed an illusion. He gets hopeful, but then Henry comes and exposes Alice to be delusional. Now Julia comes to meet Quentin, and he learns that she's been in Yale all this time and is also getting married to James. He tries to tell her the truth and uses his magic as proof, but nobody else can see it. He goes crazy, but then Julia says something suspicious and he senses something's up. Later, Jane appears and tells Quentin that he's been trapped inside a spell. She redirects him to a book but vanishes after that. The next day, Quentin's roommate tears up his book, so he asks for tape, but he isn't allowed to use it. At music therapy, Quentin senses an opportunity and sings a Taylor Swift song to get inside Penny's head. However, he's taken to the psychiatrist and is told about how he tried to kill his father when he confused him to be the Beast. This makes Quentin go crazy, but luckily Penny enters his head to confront him about the Taylor Swift songs. Quentin is relieved to know that he's indeed in a trance, so he asks Penny to help him out. That's when we learn that Marina is the cause of this, as she's giving Julia the power to mess with Quentin's head. Later, Quentin sneaks his way to some tape and fixes up the pages of the book. He learns that this spell is a trick of the madness maker Ellis. He also finds out that Jane was able to break the curse, but is interrupted by the warden before he makes further progress. Now Penny looks for Quentin, and then Katie takes him to the body. They immediately alert Henry about this, and he uses the bug spirit Matarese to break the spell, but it also causes the school shields to be lowered. This turns out to be Marina's main plan, as she uses the opportunity to break in with Julia. As Matarese enters Quentin's body, Penny enters his mind to guide him when he's getting tortured by his visions. Quentin manages to break the illusion, but things go wrong when he finds himself in a corner. Meanwhile, Marina explains that she was kicked out of the school 3 months before her graduation, so she's here to take back her memories. Then Katie confronts Julia about what she's done, so she tries to help but is of no use at the moment. That's when Quentin meets Jane and Alice, who offer to play chess with him. He realizes the trick, so he refuses to play, and this allows him to break the spell and wake up. Unfortunately, Marina gets her memories and takes Julia away so that she isn't questioned. Now Henry talks to Quentin about Julia and the Hedge Witches so that they can be prepared the next time. Meanwhile, Marina punishes Julia and banishes her for ratting her out to Henry. And that's the end of part 1. Like, share and subscribe for more content, and hit the bell icon to get notified when part 2 is up and running. See you later.